Welcome back to the Booker Prize live from the old library at the Guildhall. As some of you know, the book has become a bit like the boat race, part of the national punting pool, and Ladbrokes offer odds on the Good Terrorist 6-4, the Bone People 3-1, Illiwacker 7-2, the Good Apprentice 7-2, Last Letters from Havre 10-1, and the Battle of Pollux Crossing 16-1. Now Hermione Lee, back in our studios, is joined by our own panel to discuss the books on that shortlist.
With me in the studio are John Carey, Merton Professor of English at Oxford and author of books on Dickens, Thackeray and John Donne; Germaine Greer, polemicist, broadcaster and writer, whose books include The Female Eunuch and Sex and Destiny; and Paul Theroux, novelist and travel writer, whose fiction includes Mosquito Coast and Dr. Slaughter, and whose most recent travel book is The Imperial Way. I think for the sake of variety we should talk about the books in reverse alphabetical order. So could we start with Iris Murdoch, and can I ask you, John Carey, what you think of The Good Apprentice?
Well, it's very clever, like everything Iris Murdoch writes, and it also seems to me to fall into two parts. There's a kind of fancy dress part and a kind of moralistic part. And the fancy dress part, which is set in this curious castle or big house by the sea, seaguard with the three women in their pre-Raphaelite clothes, is actually very well done, I think, in that you think it's rather soppy and innocent to start with, and then it becomes sinister. You realise they've got this part of the Bell family, kind of prisoner come invalid. The moralistic part, I think, is rather disgusting in a way. I mean, the adulterers, Midge and Harry. Harry's unspeakably awful. No, I know men are horrible. They're not as horrible as that. He's so stupid and arrogant and shallow. They are sort of held up for punishment by the novelist. I feel uncomfortable when I see that happen. It's like a sort of public execution. The best thing I thought that came out of it was really the good figure Stuart, whom everyone detests until the end, when they realise he's done some good. He just tries to be, not a Christian, just tries to do good, like Dostoevsky's idiot. And that was a clever idea.
Yeah. Like Dostoevsky, I think she is extraordinarily good at obsession and remorse and states of mind you can't get out of. Paul Theroux, what did you think?
Yes, I think it's a tremendously good study of guilt and remorse after an accidental death, which is actually precipitated by one of the characters, Edward. He goes into a depression, and I think that his guilty phase is extremely well done. There are an awful lot of characters in this novel. There are an awful lot of plot lines. You understand what Edward is doing, and Edward's looking for his father, of course, and then other characters intrude. Now, those characters also, as in other Iris Murdoch novels, have interesting lives, but you're not quite as interested in them as you are in other characters. I actually think that it's very plotty, this book, very plotty.
Too many characters for me?
It's too many tergiversations. What gets me down is, somebody sees a mouse in the underground and his entire mental outlook changes, and then he sees something else that changes again. I get a feeling that there's no such thing as constancy in human beings, that our emotional life, as she sees it, is something frivolous almost. It's all on the turn of a coin. I find something thin and mean in this view of humanity.
I think people are like that. They don't know what they're doing half the time.
No, but they tend to go on being themselves. And it seems to me that in a Murdoch novel, they're capable of all kinds of strange metamorphoses. And there is the curious sort of mythic, Grayley, Mallory, Tolkien thing about the trip to the underworld, the Enchanter's Castle, and the strange, obvious symbolism, which she doesn't scruple to underline. And so, by the way, in case you didn't know what that was the Enchanter's Castle falling to pieces, and you think, come on, and there's something condescending towards people. And the worst character, of course, the worst treated of the characters is the one most like me, poor old Elspeth McCran, whom I quite like.
Let's go on to Jan Morris's novel, Last Letters from Havre. Paul Theroux, did you have special feelings about this as a travel writer yourself?
I don't know whether I had special feelings about it, but I did feel that it was somewhat inanimate. I don't think it actually caught fire and came to life. It's odd when a person has distinguished herself by writing great travel pieces and brought places to life in the way that Jan Morris has, decides to write a novel. I think novels late in life can be dangerous things, and sometimes look a bit odd. And I felt that there was an oddness in this. That it wasn't as funny as her best travel writing, and it wasn't as physical in the way that her best travel writing is. I couldn't make up my mind whether she was having a go at herself, or just whether she had discovered a way of writing a novel. In the right hands, I think it's a great subject, the idea of writing about an imaginary place, as if it exists in Erewhon or something like that. But I actually felt that this didn't come off.
I felt rather like Catherine Mansfield saying of E.M. Forster, it's a lovely teapot, but there ain't going to be no tea. It seems like preparation for something that never happened, doesn't it?
Well, I read it in rather a skulking and horrid way because I read it trying to discover more about the character Jan Morris, because I think Jan Morris is a self-created entity. And I was looking particularly to see how this narrator emerges. And one of the things that I really found startling, because it was so obvious in a way, was the girlishness of the style. We actually had the lost exclamation point, the little giggly exclamation point, and silly words like splodgy and wodgy. And it's eventually I began to create this myth of my own about how Havre was invented. And I imagined it being a sort of family game. So we're on a very long and boring car journey. Let's invent a place. What is their national dish? Their national dish is sea urchins. It seemed to be very obvious that Jan Morris had never eaten sea urchins.
Anything more than a family game, John Kerry?
I think it is a curiously empty book. It's written out of great affection. It's skillfully written, one has to say that. Of course, she's a skillful writer, but it's written out of an affection for a kind of glamour and glitter and cultural triviality, it seems to me, which is all put together without any centre to the book. So that by the end, when she attempts to introduce a kind of apocalyptic themes and battleships arrive from somewhere, there's nothing which in any logical way leads to that. It hasn't actually got a driving force to it. I thought the best thing about it were the chapter headings, which imitate the chapter headings of 1950 travel books. And the strange phrases with dashes between them, like visit to the troglodytes, terrible story of X. So that was really very clever and funny, I thought. Much better than the chapters themselves.
Yes, let's go on to talk about Doris Lessing, The Good Terrorist. What did you make of that?
Well, I think that it's a book which tries to present terrorism through a very Daily Telegraph reader's viewpoint, actually. You have this girl, Alice, who has had a good upbringing, middle-class mother, everything she's ever needed in life, and who's obviously twisted and vicious and hateful and full of hate herself. She hates the suburban life and so on. She's attached to this boy, Jasper, who is clearly worthless. And the other people in the house, in this communist squat, are disturbed, all of them, in various ways. It is a very concentrated novel. I mean, you do get it bound up with their wish to replenish the house, to clean it out, get rid of all the stuff that's filling the lavatories and so on, and put on the water and the electricity. But I feel it's a bit like doing woodwork. I mean, you know, you feel that you're having a time learning about practical matters, but it's not very like literature.
Do you think it was a reactionary book, Germaine, in the sense that all left-wing causes in the book seem to be tarred with the same brush?
Well, not Daily Telegraph reactionary. I think it's probably a conservative left-wing reactionary. Let's get rid of the character defect left. But it's one of the functions of novels, I'd have thought, to make you understand kinds of behaviour which are not normally terribly understandable. And I don't think this novel makes any attempt to understand. The judgment is made from the beginning. If one is repelled by the judgment of Harry Enbridge, you have to be repelled by this terrifically superior, cold, distant eye. I think it's a timely book, but I think it also isn't terribly helpful because we ought to understand the phenomenon. And I think in a way she makes it less understandable. You really can't explain people's political attitudes as a result of psychosis. If you do that, you're just begging the question.
Well, I didn't think that people had any political attitudes. I thought that one of the deficiencies in the book was that you really didn't know what they stood for. But one of the virtues of the book was that you knew everything about how people begin to inhabit a place, how they take root, and how they do housework, and how they get the gas and electricity turned on and unblock the toilet. That sort of Robinson Crusoe detail I find compelling. And because it's about something, it's attached to something, and there is a certain stink of reality about it. But as far as the political ideas, it was a series of blunders, a chapter of accident, where it was only in passing that they happened to mention that this was, I think it was a mistake, that the bomb was planted by the IRA. It is about a bombing.
They're incompetent, aren't they? They're not in control of what they're doing.
Yes, I actually think that that may be true, but it doesn't make the book, it doesn't give the book more power. I think as far as Doris Lessing's books go, I think this is certainly one of her better books. But I was wondering about it. I don't think it's a reactionary book, though.
Can we talk now about Kerry Hume's book, Bone People? Paul Frew, what did you think?
I don't have a lot to say about the Bone People. I found the Bone People unreadable.
Wow.
I think that there's a problem with the construction, and I think it's a problem of point of view. I think it's really a book that is extremely crudely written and presented. I also think it's rather unfocused. I couldn't tell where these voices were coming from, who they were about, and I never actually saw particular crisp pictures, the sort that one is used to in a Booker Prize candidate.
I thought it was gripping but sentimental. John Carey.
I thought it was magnificent, actually. Sentimental right at the end, because I think she ruined the novel, but she certainly should not, in my opinion, have saved the woman from death by cancer at the end and made her happy marriage out of the whole thing. But it's about a child who was battered appallingly by this man, about the girl finding out about it. It's about New Zealand, essentially. It seems to me the way it recreates the shorescapes, the food, the smells, the voices, the whole Maori culture is simply compelling. I found it, I couldn't put it down.
I thought that there is certainly a very powerful and strong presence in the heroine. How did you react to her, Jane?
Well, I came to it after the aridity of Iris Murdoch, which dried me out rather. And I was actually sitting on a train and began to read this thinking, oh God. And I stumbled through all that strange typesetting and stuff at the beginning. And it gradually, absolutely grabbed me completely. Because it's true in a way to say it's sentimental, but it's also the most anti-sentimental book you can imagine, because every single emotional situation escapes cliche, generally turns right round on top of itself and smacks you in the mouth. And you begin to understand violence and aggression as part of a deep attachment, which is something I had never understood before. And I really like a book that makes me understand a whole dimension of human behavior that I read about in the paper and can't grasp. I think it's extremely mannered. It is crudely written. It's true that the point of view is obscured. Some pages are absolutely lamentable. But I think this is really what we're after. And what we're after is a talent that should be fostered. Discipline can come next. What you want first is the talent. And it's there in bags, I think.
Are you saying that what we're after as looking for a Booker Prize book is something new and odd, and also something from another country?
And something which is committed to something really important and powerful. I mean, this is dealing with a vital problem about, as you say, how love comes out of cruel people. I don't entirely believe in Joan, the child batterer. I wish one actually that one had gone more deeply into him. But this dumb boy with the singing in his head and the strange past and the nightmares out which he wakes screaming, and the need for the man who is killing him. I mean, who actually nearly blinds and deafens him in the end by the final battle. That is extremely powerful.
There's also a much darker picture there. And I think if she'd actually been true to her own imaginative vision, she would have ended the book in the blackest tragedy. She just quails, because it is about the rape of Maori culture, the imposition of an inadequate culture which is mostly sustained by alcohol. And the book is awash in a sea of drink, and that's what gets the child battered. And that is part of the Antipodean heritage. We are a nation, we're not a nation, we're two nations of drunks.
She does let them off the hook at the end, perhaps a bit. Anyway, let's go on and talk about J.L. Carr novel, which is the Battle of Pollock's Crossing. Jermaine, what did you think about it?
I thought this was a book about writing a book in a way. The imposition of the Tristram Shandy mode on the narrative really, to my mind, doesn't work. Partly because somehow the cadence is gone. And it keeps referring to that as the imaginative source. It keeps referring to 18th century sentimentalism and to Augustinism and so on. It's not really there. Sometimes the ear goes really dead, and all these strange people trotting around in Dakota talking in Johnsonian sentences. I can see the way the game has been played, but I think it was played perhaps for too long. Somehow it's become embalmed.
I like the sense that one got of the sort of vast, strange spaces of America. So you get to a shop and it says free iced water 329 miles on. All those sorts of jokes I thought were very good.
Yes, I think the sense of place is very strong. And I did think that it took a while for the story to catch fire. It took ages for this man to actually get there, meet his class. He was a teacher after all. And what he was actually writing about was a sort of preparation. I thought once the story got going, and that was about 50 pages in, then he seemed to be writing about something. He seemed to be writing about the life of a town, of a very small town. And he was an alien in that town, and a kind of Martian figure. And I thought that he brought off very well.
Okay.
Yes, I liked it. I mean, it's a kind of miniature, but it's a miniature with vistas, isn't it? As you look into the miniature, you see South Dakota plains, and you see the history of the place. These extraordinary stories told very quickly about the girl killed in the prairie fire. It's a marvelous bit of the book. And you also see behind this man, the man with the 18th century in his mind, as it were, Farewell. You see the whole culture that he is trying to assimilate. He's never been to England, but he thinks in that way. And so it builds to a climax that I found very moving when Farewell, who is a bank manager, he gives all the money away to save the farmers, and is mobbed and killed, gunned down. When he died in the shack, the hero has to think of something to say to him. There's this man with a few seconds to him, and he says, Carter will tell you what it is. He quotes from Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress about going across the river. It's extremely moving the way that whole literary heritage moves in there.
I was surprised by what looked to be a comic book turning out to be so disturbing and I think moving as well. John Carey, what did you think about our last book, Peter Carey's Illywacker?
It's magnificent. It is a superb, massive book. It's extremely funny and very tragic at the same time. I mean, it's got the way of bringing those two things together. Extremely funny, for example, I mean, this extraordinary character at the centre of the novel, one of my favourite scenes is when he's making love on the roof to Phoebe, his first wife, and Phoebe's mother, who was trying to keep people away from all men, shouts up, thinking he's mending the roof, of course. I don't know, Phoebe's up there, these two naked this naked couple on the roof, and she's saying, would you like a cup of tea when you're through? And here's the chap said, thank you very much. It's very funny, right through to the end, when this man's son runs the biggest pet shop in the world, smuggles dying species out of the country, and that the sire, his son, with a golden-shouldered parrot stitched into his trousers, bound up carefully in cotton, and one of the women passengers grabs him to make love, and alas, the large golden-shouldered parrot spurts, gets blood all over the sides of his sire's trousers. So it is very funny, very sad. It's simply unending. It's a wonderful gold mine of a book.
Paul Frew, did you find it more readable than the New Zealand novel?
Yes, and it's interesting that you should mention that New Zealand novel because there's a lot of Maori lingo in the Bone People, which is incomprehensible in the book. There's a lot of Australian slang in Illywacker, Peter Carey's book, but Peter Carey gives you the language in context. You understand what a goog is, or I don't know, didgeridoo and all the other business, which were totally unfamiliar to Vegemite. There's a goanna in a Vegemite jar. And at the end of it, I knew what this fellow was talking about. I think it's a marvelous book. I think it's quite a feat of imagination. It's an extremely clever feat of tone, being able to use formal language and also slang. I actually think it's the most successful of the bunch.
What did you think of it, Tracy?
Well, it belongs in a tradition, and the tradition, I suppose, goes back to Such Is Life by Tom Collins, which is the pseudonym of Joseph Berkeley. And the important part of it is that you have a protagonist who is not correct, who is wrong about things, and who is a terrible liar. Except in Such Is Life, I think it's done in a much more disciplined way. I think the other parent is Henry Lawson, to whom Carey refers consciously and unconsciously all the time. I get a bit worried about another dimension of it, though, which is actually present in a number of the books we've had to look at, which I call the sort of post-Tolkien astigmatism. So it really doesn't matter if things are true or false, if they're historically exact or not, if places are where they're supposed to be or not. That as if an imaginary realm would be more interesting than a real realm.
Well, I thought he was doing what Salman Rushdie does with India, which is in Midnight Children, which is to reinvent it, to make it his own place. And I like that.
There's a tradition of books about liars. I actually think that as a genre, books about liars are terrible. And this is one that I actually like. I mean, as soon as a character says, my name is Herbert Badgery, I'm a liar, I prepare myself for the worst.
Well, we must now all tell the truth, which is to say, which of these books we would like to win the book prize, and which of these books do you think the judges is going to choose?
I would like Carey Hume to win it, because I think in all the incrustations there's a really major talent there. But I suppose they'll go for Illywacker. It's more accessible.
That's terrible. I agree entirely. Now, I would like Kerry Hume to win it too. It's a very uneven book. It's got lots of mistakes, but it had in the middle of it something I think more important than Peter Carey has, wonderful as he is, courageous as he is. But I think Peter Carey will win it.
Well, I think Kerry Hume should write a few more books, and then we should judge whether she's a good writer or a bad writer. I think this is the first novel and shows it. I actually think that Iliwaka is the best of the bunch. I think it probably won't win. I think The Good Terrorist will win by Doris Lessing.
Yes, I agree with you entirely.